In an old courtroom sketch, a middle-aged woman stands silently by the edge of a bridge. Her hand grips a cloth bag. Her long coat billows slightly and her head tilts downward. Just a few strokes of charcoal, yet her eyes are rendered with unsettling precision, neither panicked nor sorrowful. They say it was the last image of Amelia Dyer, drawn from the memory of a witness who saw her by the Thames in 1896. I came across her name while digging through old records on baby farming in late 19th century England. Hundreds of tiny classified ads in newspapers read, "Seeking someone to adopt an infant. Unwed mother unable to care for child." Below was her address. In the heart of Victorian England, her name was passed quietly from one woman to another. It always resurfaced in moments of desperation. At first, I assumed it was some form of illicit trade. Take the money, place the child elsewhere. Until I read through the list of babies entrusted to her. Why did they all gradually disappear without explanation? Why did they vanish entirely from the records? I read one report, an infant discovered in a cloth bag, bound with white yarn. It started with one case, then 2, then 10. All tied the same way, all drifting in the same stretch of river near her home. People often say monsters kill in fits of madness, but Amelia Dyer wasn't mad. She acted with composure, each step executed with the precision of a routine she had repeated many times. I read the last letter she wrote before her arrest. The handwriting was delicate, the tone gentle. The final line read, "Know I deserve punishment, but if they understood the circumstances, perhaps they would forgive me." Victorian England was a society built on rigid appearances, where morality was worn like a badge, and reputation meant more than truth. It was a time when grief was hidden behind curtains, and shame was treated like a disease that needed isolation, not compassion. For women, especially those without a husband, the rules were even harsher. A single misstep could unravel everything, and nothing unraveled a woman's life faster than a child born outside of marriage. These children weren't welcomed into the world. They were whispered about. Their mothers were seen as careless, immoral, unfit to belong. She would lose her job, her place in the community, even her own family's support. There were no safety nets, no protections, only doors that closed, one after another. And so, in the cracks of this moral order, something took root. A quiet trade, legal, unregulated, and devastating in its implications. It was called baby farming, a system where desperate mothers paid other women to take their infants with the hope they would be cared for or adopted. There were no background checks, no follow-ups, no accountability, just money exchanged, a baby handed over, and silence. Amelia Dyer didn't create this system. She simply understood how perfectly it allowed harm to hide in plain sight. She didn't need to seek out those in danger or leave a trail of suspicion. All she needed was society's silence. Over time, what began as a service turned into something far more calculated. A pattern, a method, a way to erase lives without resistance. And in that method, Amelia became something the world wasn't ready to name. A woman who turned societal neglect into personal gain. A name that years later would come to define the quiet horror of a forgotten industry. A female serial killer whose tools weren't knives or guns, but shame, trust, and indifference. She didn't look like a predator. She looked like someone you'd thank, someone you'd believe, and that perhaps is what made her so dangerous. Before she became a name whispered in horror, Amelia Dyer was simply another woman trying to survive a world that didn't care. She was born in a working-class town near Bristol, the kind of place where hardship wasn't a season, it was a way of life. Her father was a shoemaker. Her mother, for much of Amelia's youth, was battling mental illness, a slow, visible unraveling that played out in front of neighbors who offered prayers, but not help. From a young age, Amelia learned two things: that pain had no value, and that silence was easier than asking for kindness. She was bright, literate, resourceful, qualities that should have offered her a different life. But in Victorian England, intelligence meant nothing if you were poor, female, and alone. She trained as a nurse. She learned how to care for the sick, to deliver children, to clean wounds no one else would touch. And yet, even as she helped others bring life into the world, she lived on the margins of it. Just another unmarried woman with no voice, no prospects, and no place to land safely. From a criminal psychology perspective, what makes Amelia Dyer stand out is not that she was cruel, but that she believed cruelty was already everywhere. She didn't invent indifference. She grew up inside it, and somewhere along the way, that indifference became armor. She married, widowed, married again, widowed again. Each chapter in her life closed with more loss, more shame, and fewer options. In a society that only valued women as wives or mothers and punished them the moment they failed to be either, Amelia began to shape a different kind of role for herself. One the world never saw coming. Long before she became a female serial killer, she was a woman who had been taught that nothing she felt mattered. So she stopped feeling, and the world, for a time, thanked her for it. In the ledgers of true crime, her name is filed under monsters. But behind that label is a story of a woman who asked for dignity and got silence instead. For a long time, no one thought to question her. Amelia Dyer blended into the background of a world already too overwhelmed to care. She wore dark, modest clothing. She spoke with care, moved with intention, and never overstayed her welcome. To neighbors and landlords, she was simply another tired woman doing her best. To grieving mothers, she was the last thread of mercy they could afford to believe in. And for a while, that belief held strong. She was known for her quiet efficiency, how quickly she arrived, how little she asked for, how fast she disappeared again. In a society already desperate to forget what it didn't want to face, her silence was welcomed, expected even. Amelia didn't need to lie. She only needed to give people what they already wanted, a way to look away. But over time, the stillness around her began to feel too still. There were minor inconsistencies, too small to accuse, but too frequent to ignore. A payment logged twice under two different names. A child who never appeared in any records, though payment had already been made. A letter returned to a mother who never received a response. The details weren't alarming by themselves, but together, they created a kind of tension that felt unnatural, like a fabric stretched too tightly. And when people looked back, they realized the same names, the same locations, and the same silent disappearances seemed to orbit one woman again and again. From a criminal psychology perspective, this is where Amelia Dyer becomes more than a desperate caregiver. She becomes a strategist, a female serial killer who didn't need to force her way into people's lives because they opened the door for her. Her pattern wasn't what she did, it was what she avoided. No drama, no confrontation, no mess, just a series of clean exits from situations no one wanted to revisit. She used society's shame as both shield and weapon, and the more people ignored what they didn't understand, the more efficient she became. By the time suspicion finally surfaced, the damage was already woven into the silence they'd all been living with. It didn't look like a crime scene, just another rented house on a quiet street, modest, forgettable. But when investigators stepped inside, what they found didn't speak in screams or blood. It spoke in records, in receipts, in the quiet traces of lives that should have gone on, but didn't. What started the unraveling was a single package pulled from the Thames, a bundle wrapped too deliberately to be dismissed. It wasn't the contents that startled investigators. It was the care taken to conceal them. What followed wasn't a dramatic arrest. It was a slow gathering of suspicion, a shift in the air, a feeling that something had been wrong for a very long time, and that someone had finally stopped looking away. Amelia Dyer was taken in on suspicion of fraud, but as the pieces came together, the story expanded beyond anything paperwork could explain. It wasn't about money, it was about absence, the kind that creeps in slowly until silence feels normal. Neighbors came forward. Landlords found names in their ledgers they hadn't thought to question. A nurse remembered seeing a cloth bundle twice. 2 different mothers, one identical goodbye. And just like that, the woman they'd trusted began to dissolve into something else. Behind the gentle voice was a ledger. Behind the smile, a pattern so precise it could no longer be called coincidence. From a criminal psychology standpoint, Amelia Dyer wasn't driven by impulse or emotion. Unlike many female serial killers, she didn't lash out in anger or desperation. Her actions weren't erratic. They were methodical, consistent, rehearsed, almost procedural in their structure. She didn't eliminate people in bursts of rage. She erased them, quietly, completely, before anyone even noticed they were gone. For years, she had lived among grief, but it hadn't weighed her down. It had sustained her. She didn't fear mourning. She adapted to it. She made herself indispensable within it. And by the time the truth surfaced, the betrayal wasn't just personal. It was systemic. Because Amelia never begged for trust. She didn't ask to be believed. We were the ones who filled in the story for her. And that, in the end, may have been her greatest deception of all. Some trials deliver justice. Others only confirm that justice was never really possible. Amelia Dyer's case did both, and neither. It brought the truth into daylight, but left the public with more questions than answers, and wounds that no verdict could fully close. When the trial began, the courtroom filled with people who didn't come to see horror. They came to understand how someone so quiet, so seemingly helpful, had moved unnoticed for years. How a woman trusted by grieving mothers and indifferent landlords could, over time, become the center of something so deliberate and so devastating. The prosecution built its case on fragments, ledgers, receipts, testimony, and memory. What they couldn't build, though, was certainty. Because the truth wasn't in one document or one witness. It lived in the empty spaces, in the names that had vanished from records, in the mothers who had moved on in silence, and in the realization that no one had ever truly counted. The official charges were clear. The sentence came swiftly. But the relief that verdicts usually bring, it never arrived, because everyone knew that what Amelia Dyer had done couldn't be measured only by what the court could prove. From a criminal psychology perspective, she didn't fit the profile of a typical female serial killer. She wasn't erratic. She wasn't vengeful. There was no signature rage. Instead, she was consistent, structured, predictable in the way that systems are, and that's what made her so unsettling. Her case didn't just reveal individual cruelty, it exposed the quiet machinery of neglect that had been running in the background of society for decades. The scandal forced lawmakers to act. What was once unregulated was now debated in Parliament. Laws were drafted. Oversight was demanded. And for the first time, the public was forced to admit that what had happened wasn't the result of one woman's deception. It was the product of collective inattention. Amelia Dyer hadn't hidden in the shadows. She had operated in the open, and the reason she was able to do so for so long wasn't because she was clever. It was because the world around her had made looking away the easier option. It would be easy to leave Amelia Dyer's story in the past, to file her away as a historical aberration, a name on an old ledger, a shadow in a time long gone. But the truth is, her case still echoes, not just because of what she did, but because of what we failed to do around her. She didn't operate in the dark. She operated in the open, within a system that was too indifferent, too overwhelmed, or too proud to ask the right questions. That's what makes her legacy so enduring. Not the crime, but the silence that made it possible. In the broader history of true crime, Amelia Dyer stands as a chilling reminder that sometimes the most dangerous people are not the ones who hide, but the ones who are hidden by convenience. And among female serial killers, her story defies the patterns. She wasn't driven by revenge, jealousy, or sudden rage. She was driven by opportunity, created, protected, and prolonged by social neglect. Criminal psychology often focuses on motive. But what happens when the motive is not personal at all? When it's systemic? When it grows out of a culture that teaches some lives matter less, and some disappearances don't need to be investigated? Maybe that's the question Amelia Dyer leaves us with. Not just how could she, but why didn't we see it? And perhaps the hardest truth of all, we did see it. We just didn't want to believe it,